The TREE project is one of three funded by National Environment Research Council, the Environment Agency, and Radioactive Waste Management Limited, and also the ESPRC. TREE stands for Transfer, Exposure and Effects, and we're trying to look at uncertainty in how we estimate exposure of humans and wildlife, and trying to understand whether how the models we have at the moment, whether they're conservative, whether they're good, and trying to improve those models. Contamination in this area, you'd probably find levels as high in Cumbria on the felltop, so the levels are comparatively low. Okay, but up here, this is actually on the Western Trace. This area is actually where Mike and I suggested we go on field work, but accessibility for a bus meant we couldn't. So this is basically a little bit, this is a railway line coming out of Chernobyl. It's further along the trace you're on now, so this has a very good gradient across the middle. And part of the aim of what we're doing is, allied to this, we were thinking about colouring and putting dosimeters onto wildlife. And if we had done that, that might have been a good site. So we're starting from the basics of looking at soil biogeochemistry, models of estimating transfer to wildlife and to farm animals and crops, and through to how animals interact with the environment and the exposure they get, right through to effect studies in aquatic and terrestrial systems. So the motivation for us in doing this work was, in reality, there's not really been any large mammal work done in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone of any sort, really. From the Ukrainian side, the only work we're aware of that's been published is a group who looked at prints in the snow. And from that, they concluded there was a low biodiversity and strange prey-predator relationships. And that's it. I oversee what's called Work Package 2, which is in fact about transfer. So a lot of the way transfer is about how radioactive elements get in wildlife or foodstuffs. And a lot of our approaches are quite simple. So basically, for crops and for wildlife, all we simply do is we compare the level in a crop, in grass for instance, to the level in soil. And that's simple, it's pragmatic, it's easy because we have a vast number of elements we have to consider and a vast number of organisms and crop types. However, it's got some disadvantages. It's a highly variable approach, because one of the main controlling factors for transfer of radionuclides to plants and then to animals is the soil type. So it's not uncommon for a radionuclide to see 5 orders of magnitude in this simple parameter. So it's not always a good parameter to be using. So what we're trying to do is come up with an alternative approach. And we're trying to adapt an approach that plant scientists like Neil, who you've already spoken to, have been developing over a number of years. So what we're actually trying to do is we're doing sampling. We're doing sampling here at Chernobyl, because we can measure some elements here that we can't measure anywhere else, like iodine-129, maybe technetium-99 in wildlife. Also in Spain, because that's a type of climate where there's very little data for, and then 2 sites in the United Kingdom. And then we also have a big database we put together over the last 5 or 6 years, which we're analysing. So what we're actually doing is, for a lot of elements, we're throwing all our data in, and what we're trying to do is come up with relationships between species. So this means you need to have sites where you sampled more than one thing. And then basically what we hope we can do is, you can go to a site, you can measure, say, grass, and from that you can predict the level in a bee, in a worm, in a deer, or whatever. So we have looked at this provisionally for cesium transfer to freshwater fish, and it works well, and a lot better than the existing models. We're now doing some development work for strontium and cesium to terrestrial organisms, and at the moment that's looking promising as well. And at the same time as myself and Mike doing this for wildlife, Neil is developing approaches for crops. And we may try it with farm animals if it works well towards the end. The summer school with the students is to, and we thought was Chernobyl for one, part of a rate programme, one of the aims was to use natural laboratories. And in effect, that's what we're using Chernobyl for. So we can measure things here we couldn't measure anywhere else. It gives us a place that's been contaminated for 29 years, so we can test predictions against that. It's also, it is arguably the most contaminated place in the world. So it's a good introduction to the students to look at a contaminated environment, what's happened here over the last 29 years, to talk to some of the experts who's been working there. There's probably a lot of misunderstanding about the effects of radioactivity on the environment. Well, like for one, say a lot of the public has forgotten about Chernobyl and doesn't even remember it. And for two, a lot of those who remember it probably think it's a place where you have a lot of effects of radiation on the environment. And as you've seen over the last week, that's not necessarily the case. Undoubtedly there have been some effects, but wildlife here, for instance, is flourishing.